Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome to this edition of The Right Stand. I'm Anand Narasimhan. The Modi-Putin summit comes at a critical geopolitical moment. Vladimir Putin's visit is the first since 2021, and both sides have signaled ambition to revitalize and expand their bilateral partnership. Bharat's foreign ministry has described the relationship as a special and privileged strategic partnership, and the summit aims to set a new roadmap for deeper cooperation across defense, energy, economy, technology. Defense cooperation is expected to be the front and center, including talks about supplying additional units of the S-400 air defense system, the upgraded S-500, and even advanced platforms like the Su-57 or the Sukhoi 57 fighter jets. Civil nuclear cooperation and civil energy, especially oil imports from Russia, are also high on the agenda, as is a potential trade and financial architecture to ease payments under sanctions, including discussions around a rupee-ruble mechanism. Vladimir Putin has signaled the desire to expand ties with Bharat to a no-limits stage. Listen in.
Мы нацелены вывести сотрудничество с Китайской Народной Республикой и с Республикой Индия на качественно новый уровень с усилением его технологической составляющей. На это нацелено множество совместных проектов в энергетике, в промышленности, космосе, сельском хозяйстве и так далее. По вопросам экономической повестки у нас выстроен содержательный диалог с председателем Китайской Народной Республики господином Си Цзиньпинем. Также подробно будем обсуждать эти темы в ходе предстоящего визита в Индию с премьер-министром господином Нарендрой Моди, включая увеличение импорта индийских товаров на наш рынок.
Let us also look at the different avenues where Russia and Bharat can in fact achieve a no-limits partnership. Defense and technology cooperation. If Russia delivers more S-400 regiments and offers significant technology transfer with S-500, Bharat could both upgrade its strategic air defense and strengthen domestic manufacturing and maintenance capacity. This would align with Bharat's push under its self-reliance or Atmanirbharta policy while preserving strategic depth. Meanwhile, also energy security and diversified fuel supply. With global energy volatility and sanctions on Russia pushing up uncertainty, Bharat's continued supply of Russian oil gives it a buffer. For Russia, Bharat becomes an anchor buyer, helping Moscow maintain energy revenues even under pressure. Economic and trade expansion beyond oil. Both sides have signaled interest in a broader trade deal exporting Indian pharmaceuticals, processed foods, marine goods, consumer products, and if successful, this diversification could narrow Bharat's trade deficit with Russia and generate more balanced trade flows. Financial and payment cooperation. Given the difficulties imposed by Western sanctions and pressures on global banking, establishing a stable rupee-ruble settlement mechanism could allow both trade and investments to flow with lesser exposure to Western financial systems. The civil, nuclear and energy collaboration. Talks are expected around small and medium nuclear reactors. For Bharat, that may help address long-term energy demand. For Russia, it's a way to export nuclear technology and deepen high-value industrial collaboration. However, no-limits cooperation won't be easy. There are multiple structural and geopolitical constraints. First up, trade imbalance and financial risks. Historically, Bharat's imports are far greater from Russia than the exports, leading to a persistent trade deficit. Moreover, rupee funds accumulate in special accounts because Russia may not be able to spend them freely in Western-dominated systems, which burdens Bharat's financial institutions. Western pressure and sanctions. That's a big risk. Russia remains under sanctions owing to its Ukraine invasion, and if Bharat deepens cooperation, it may draw diplomatic pressure or secondary sanctions risks from the West. Now, Russia's simultaneously strong relations with other global powers, now especially China, they introduce a strategic complication. Bharat may find aligning fully with Russia difficult if Russia's priorities diverge, for example, in Central Asia or in defense cooperation. Implementation bottlenecks. Even if agreements are signed, putting them into practice requires stable institutional and logistical frameworks. Historical difficulties like slow movement on joint ventures, delays in defense deliveries or part supply, and underdeveloped trade infrastructure remain serious constraints. Now, meanwhile, Bharat does not want to be seen as tilting completely toward Moscow. especially when it is building relations with Western powers. It's on the verge of signing an FTA with the European Union. There's greater cooperation globally and defense partners, maintaining a multi-aligned foreign policy where there is a certain level of strategic autonomy that Bharat can exercise. However, this summit comes at a moment when global alignments are shifting. Russia is under sanctions and seeking reliable energy buyers. Bharat is rising in global influence but also looking to secure energy, defense and economic autonomy. The global order is increasingly multipolar. A push for a deeper no-limits partnership signals that both nations want to hedge uncertainties. Can the all-weather ties be leveraged for no-limits partnership? That's the question. Let's go across to our guest straight away, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, former diplomat, Dr. Anand Ranganathan, author, political commentator, analyst with us, Tatiana Kukhareva. She's a senior Russian journalist joining us from Moscow, and Professor Andrew Latham, international relations expert, joining us from Minneapolis in the US. My namaste to everybody. Thank you for your time. Tatiana, from the Russia point of view, what is perhaps the biggest box that President Putin and Russia would want to tick in this visit?
Well, I can't speak for the president personally, you know, as well as I do. You know, that's a privilege limited to his spokesperson, I'm afraid. But I think that, you know, even the fact that the summit is happening, it's happening in person, that's already a huge statement for both leaders, I believe, especially right now. We're coming off of a meeting. You know that the president met with Mr. Witkoff last night. There's been a lot of developments. This summit comes at a very interesting moment in the year. There's been a lot of loud declarations, you know, from the US, of course. There are many deals on the table. Okay. You just described them so beautifully. So wherever the two parties arrive, the Kremlin has already said this relationship is very special. This is a strategic relationship. It's a friendly relationship. It is incredibly special in the way that the two leaders share a common perspective on many things. So whatever the outcome might be, it will no doubt strengthen this relationship. That is for sure.
You know, if you were to look at what Mr. Peskov said, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, if there is an agreement at any point that Ukraine declares that it will not join NATO, this war stops, then the whole dynamic changes. And I think that's one of the biggest conditions. The immediate reason was that we don't want Ukraine to join NATO. If there is a commitment that Ukraine will not join NATO, there is a possibility of pausing this war immediately. That's one point. Then there go the sanctions, automatically a lot of things get eased. The other point is, what is the message that Bharat is going to want to send? And that'll also be determined on whether or not Prime Minister Narendra Modi receives President Putin at the airport. There'll be a lot of signaling that will happen. It's not just the 1-hour car ride in Tianjin. There's much more that could happen in New Delhi. Ambassador Rajiv Dogra.
Well, since you mentioned the 1-hour car ride, I think that was very significant in China. It conveyed many messages, and it conveyed a special bond between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi. Whatever happened in that car ride is subject to speculation, but obviously it meant that Putin cares for Prime Minister Modi and for India. Otherwise, he wouldn't have waited for 10 minutes for Prime Minister to come to the car. Mr. Modi was held up for some reason. But having said that, let me also go back a little bit in history of visits. Putin has visited India only 9 times in the last 25 years that he has been the supreme leader in Russia. Whereas he's visited China 23 times. And there have been there are annual exchanges of summits between our two leaders. There have been summits which have lasted only 4 hours in terms of a total visit by Putin to India. So it's not as if all along these 25 years, there has been great warmth between Russia and India, especially from Putin's side. I personally have been witness to that. that there was warmth and then there was a period when things started cooling off a little bit. But now is a new chapter. The visit itself, I mean, if any other leader was visiting India, or if, let's say, there was an annual summit exchange between India and Russia, it would not have been noticed very much in the outside world. But as you pointed to Ukraine and the developments there, the world is going to notice what happens in New Delhi over the next 2-3 days. So that is point number one. The second point is that despite everything, the fact is that Indian exports to Russia have remained at around between $4 to $5 billion. I'm not complaining because we needed oil. We got oil at favorable prices. So that is a positive. But beyond words that, yes, we will increase our exports and Russia will start importing more, the fact is that on ground, it has to be shown that there are some new out-of-the-box solutions to this stagnation in our trade, Indo-Russian trade. There should be much more.
Right.
Having said that, let me also point out that it is not in public knowledge, but the fact is that Indo-Russian relationship is not just defense relationship. It goes across the board, from scientific exchanges to atomic energy and so on. The relationship is very deep. And the depth in relationship is also because of what is the bond between people of Russia and people of India. That is age-old. Not just Raj Kapoor, that was important, but there were other issues that sentimentally Russians and Indians like each other.
True. Well, one of the biggest methods would be to promote tourism. And if there is tourism and there is more tourism, there will be a greater flow. There is a big, meeting of the Indian business delegation along with the Russian business delegation at Bharat Mandapam, and it's a big one that's being planned for Friday. So clearly there will be certain messaging. Andrew, how are you viewing this?
Well, in a sense, predictable. Russia needs to demonstrate to the world symbolically that it's not isolated diplomatically, and having this visit to meet with the Prime Minister of a great power like India certainly sends that signal. On the Indian side, this is another symbolic signal of, as you pointed out quite rightly, strategic autonomy and multi-alignment in an increasingly multipolar world. And so at the level of symbolism alone, this serves the interests, advances the interests of both parties. And then there are the concrete issues. First and foremost, I think, having to do with defense matters, especially on the Indian part, not limited to defense. But the need for spare parts, the need for next generation air defense systems, the S-500, for example, the need to exchange cutting edge technologies in the defense sector so that India can move more in the direction of self-sufficiency, which is a stated and obvious goal. And of course, Russia's having some difficulty supplying spare parts and next generation because it needs many of these systems at home right now. So there's a tension there that has to be sorted out. And I think the opportunity, if the 1 hour car ride is the opportunity, then that's the opportunity. But it goes in concrete terms beyond the symbolism. It goes way beyond that as well. As some of my co-panelists have just pointed out, there's all kinds of relationships that exist in the defense sector, in the energy sector, in the trade and tourism sectors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is an opportunity to sort out whatever difficulties, whatever speed bumps the two parties may have encountered in those various relationships. So symbolically, both predictable, but crucially important, and also in concrete terms, policy terms, predictable, but also very important as well. No surprises so far.
No surprises so far. Tatiana had a chuckle, a smile when you started speaking, and then she was reacting to Ambassador Rajiv Dogra. So, Dr. Ranganathan, quick word from her before I come across to you. Yes, Tatiana? You're on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah,
I believe that we've been on quite a few panels these past almost 4 years, right, Andrew? So it's been quite an interesting relationship. Well, the one thing that I should probably mention is that I don't believe that Moscow needs to show it's not isolated on a geopolitical level anymore. We've seen, again, the car ride in China. We've also seen I believe you haven't missed it, have you? Quite an interesting meeting in Alaska, just, some time ago. I don't believe we are at a place where we can talk about isolation anymore. We need to kind of step away from that narrative. It's just a little bit old, don't you think?
Well, nobody is isolated in this world, but Jeffrey Sachs was speaking with Zaka yesterday, and he said that Trump is quite a hypocrite, that he continues to trade with China and with Russia, but is imposing sanctions on other nations who want to continue this trend. So this is not going to work, weaponizing of economics for long. But Dr. Ranganathan, thank you for your patience. Yeah.
Not at all. Good evening, Anand, and good evening to my fellow panelists, all of whom are experts. So I speak here purely as a layman. If I were to sum up the entire geopolitics where India has been concerned in the last couple of years, it is Putin has given us oil, Trump has given us turmoil. Sorry about that. Look, it's a coin with two sides. One is diplomacy and the other is hypocrisy. Let me deal with the latter first up. Hypocrisy runs not only in the West veins, but also pipelines. Even as the EU continues to buy 3 million tons of Russian iron and nickel, 18 million tons of Russian LNG, 8 million tons of Russian oil, the USA continues to buy 3.5 million tons of Russian fertilizers, 435 tons of Russian uranium, 1.1 million tons of Russian oil refined by India. But they want to punish India for buying oil from Russia. India has saved $26 billion over the past 3 years by choosing Russian oil over Saudi oil. Not just because of discounted Russian oil, but also because increasing our procurement of it has lowered oil prices in general, saving us money for the rest of our oil procurement. Without that, our inflation would have risen cumulatively 1.47% beyond its actual value in those years. And what to say about the Americans? You were importing 9% of your crude from Russia well beyond the Ukraine invasion. You sat on your bum when China violated the LAC in 2020. And it was Russia, erstwhile Soviet Union, that helped us in 1971 when you sided with Pakistan. So the West can stuff its hypocrisy in its hookah and smoke it. Look, Anand, the Ukraine war apart, for which I have always condemned Russia, why should India be singled out for looking after its interests? Besides, we enjoy excellent relations with Russia. With our bilateral trade now more than $71 billion, there's oil and gas, there's economic partnership, and there's excellent defense partnership. S-400, you talked about S-500, AK-203, BrahMos, etc. But let me concentrate on the other aspect that I can elaborate myself to some extent, being a scientist. Science and technology. This year marks the 54th year of India-Russia Science and Technology Cooperation. The ILTP, or Integrated Long-Term Program, was signed between India and the erstwhile Soviet Union 50 years ago. But it has continued even after the breakup and now enjoys excellent support from both India and Russia. 8 advanced centers have been set up that include Advanced Research Center for Powder Metallurgy and New Materials, Polio and other vaccine manufacturing in Bulandshahr facility, Indo-Russian Center for Biotechnology in Allahabad, and then there's one earthquake research facility. Several new initiatives have recently been launched to deepen sector-specific cooperation, primary among them being fly ash utilization. Coming to space science, very briefly, 30 seconds. There is superb cooperation. We have a bilateral agreement under which Russia will train Indian cosmonauts for the human space mission Gaganyaan. Then there's setting up of navigation satellite systems, Indian Navig-C, the Russian GLONASS. Bottom line is, Russia is and remains a trusted friend. And talking of friends, what is it that the old rogue Kissinger said? To have America as an enemy is dangerous, but to have America as a friend is fatal.
Andrew?
Let me just I can't respond to all of that except to agree with most of it. But I will say this about the isolation piece. It's quite right. My co-panelist now for these many years points out that this is not Russia the day after the special military operation was launched. It's not that. But it is a moment in which negotiations are taking place. And those negotiations increasingly are involving not just Russia and Ukraine, but the United States and the Europeans as well. And Russia remains isolated in terms of both of those two constituencies, those two players. And I think and now I'm not I have no privileged insight, but looking as a specialist in this field from the outside looking in, it seems clear to me that one of President Putin's motives here has to be to signal to Europe and the United States, let's call it the West in general, that it is not isolated, that it is a player on the global stage. It's a great power with global reach, not just regional reach, and that when it's at the negotiating table with these parties, it needs to be taken seriously. There's another audience for this as well, that Russia, to some extent, is still, I think, looking to position itself as a leader, along with India and China, of the global South. Yeah. And this is another way of signaling that. So in terms of Moscow's motives, again, no privileged insight, but looking at it from a rational actor perspective, those are obvious motives. No. And then from India's perspective, an additional piece, which I didn't put on the table, and I don't think anybody has yet, is that from New Delhi's perspective, the growing relationship between China and Russia is somewhat problematic and more than a little troubling. So not in it, since we've invoked Kissinger, not driving a wedge between these two powers, as Kissinger tried to do, but certainly to mitigate some of that and to make sure that Russia does not fall into China's camp, or that there's not a bilateral relationship there which works against India's interests. I think that's got to be a motive on New Delhi's part as well.
Yeah, but the other thing is that Russia and China have their own conflict with respect to Vladivostok and that region. But they've overcome that and they've tried to work with each other at a time when perhaps this Asia bloc, there is a certain level of counter that happens. But from Bharat's point of view, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, what is going to be critical for us? Because we are also on the cusp, and we are not looking at the near term. We're not looking at over the next 2 or 3 years. This is a gaze over the next decade. There is a direction in which the world is moving. There is a direction in which the global opinion is shifting. There is a direction in which more nations are thinking about the WTO. They're looking at the UN. They're looking at the UNSC, and these are all far greater strategic drivers of the way a global multipolar conversation will be driven. Is that also going to somewhere play up?
Well, this is a time of great flux, not change, because change is hard to come by, especially when great power interests are involved. But let me take a point on the issue of isolation. It is sometimes assumed that if USA is annoyed with you for some reason, then you're isolated. And if USA and Europe get together and are angry with you, then God be with you. That is not how the world is today. Europe is no longer in the reckoning of world powers. USA and China are. There's no doubt about it. But USA has tried its best to isolate Russia, and it has not succeeded. In part because India stood firm, to some extent Brazil also stood firm, and the global South understands and appreciates Russia's position more than it appreciates USA's determination to sanction anyone and everybody. So Russia is certainly not isolated in the global South. As far as India's interests are concerned, India's interests are not to seek support from Russia in any difficulty that it gets into. India is far too mature and big a power to be seeking help from others. But India welcomes the hand of friendship. I have already mentioned the incident in China. And such gestures go a long way. You mentioned about 1971 war. People remember it in India even now. People in Russia remember all the support that India has given to Russia, starting from when the Cold War ended and Russia was in deep trouble. There was a time when Russian Air Force planes could not fly in the year 2000 because the Russian government did not have the money to give to the Russian oil producing companies. So Russia has come a long way. And Mr. Putin has a long memory, and hopefully after the recent events, there is a realization that India has stood by Russia, and we need to take concrete steps beyond
Ji.
what is happening on defense front and space and so on, which are great items of issues of cooperation. There is something where we need to develop this relationship to a level, economic level, where sanctions will not matter any longer in future, as you said, in middle term, 10 years from now, and so on. That is going to be the strength of this relationship.
No, there is this reloss deal that's also now been approved not just by the cabinet but also by the Duma, so the parliament itself, and that also talks about both nations being able to use each other's bases. There is something far greater that is now happening, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra. Dr. Ranganathan, coming to you after this, just quickly weigh in on that also, please.
Well, I can tell you that we have been cooperating with Russia even in terms of bases, for example, in the Aini base in Tajikistan.
Yeah.
So I will not be surprised if there is a time when India and Russia, besides exchanges during the military drills, which are regular features amongst countries, there comes a time when we go beyond that and come to some kind of a concrete understanding where our militaries exchange more than just training exercises. And that will be good.
Dr. Ranganathan, yes.
No, I was just saying, as a layman who doesn't understand or doesn't want to follow the intricacies of diplomacy, that I respect, by the way, it's important, because the extreme other side of it we've seen by the way Trump conducts himself. The reality is, I speak again as a layman, what irks us most is the hypocrisy of it. Now, we were bypassing the sanctions that the West had slapped on Russia because the oil price cap was there, and irked by that because almost 40% of our oil was coming from Russia. They slapped sanctions on the two Russian oil majors to, nip it in the bud. But guess who got the exemption? Not us, but Germany and UK. So this is what hurts us, that if you are slapping sanctions, why do you have double standards? I'm not even talking about slapping tariffs on China. I'm talking of when you have the secondary sanctions that are hurting us now because we can't directly buy from the Russian oil majors. Why have the UK and Germany been given exemption? That is point number one. And point number two is Trump has demolished this so-called construction that had happened, you can say, maybe by the end of the Cold War. Again, I speak as a layman, where globalization was the buzzword and people were getting well. Now, if you know, at least in the last 2 years, every nation is trying to have a FTA or free trade agreement with every other nation. Yeah. India has already had it with Switzerland. India is had it with UK. It's had it with Israel, and now with America. So it's completely deglobalized world, and I think the West should accept it, each person on his or her own.
True. The entire rules-based order or the WTO norms were first scoffed at and mocked by the Americans themselves. They are the ones who set these rules in place, and they are the ones who have scoffed and mocked it. The other simple point to ponder as we wind this up for now, but we will obviously over the course of the next 24 to 48 hours dwell on all the developments, is that Warsaw no longer exists. The Warsaw Pact never exists. NATO came into force because of Warsaw. And it's NATO that's expanded eastward. Ukraine is called borderlands. And whose borderlands are you trying to get into as a Western power? At whose doorstep? This is something, so who's the villain here and who's the hero? Well, we leave that for the viewers to ponder, but there is much more at stake in this Modi-Putin visit and also this entire summit, the Russia-India summit. We'll continue to track that. Andrew, Tatiana, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra and Dr. Ranganathan, thank you very much. Dr.